I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to ask Tom to come up and introduce our speaker.
Till Brewitt is our speaker. Till is my stepson, Marianne's oldest son. He was going to be here possibly because he can work remotely, but he also travels around the world a bit, and there's apparently some scheduling issues and he can explain if he wants to. But I'll just give you a little background on him. Marianne and I got married in 1984 in August 4th, and on August 20th, we took Till, who had just graduated from high school, to Duke to go to college. So I've never lived with him, but I know him intimately. And it's been a very interesting experience to have him locate around the world. Initially working for, actually in graduate school, going to University of Bologna in Italy, where Johns Hopkins has a graduate school program, which he was in Johns Hopkins in graduate school, and always worked in international economics, has worked for a bank, but for most of his time has worked in international aid organizations, an organization called FINCA to start with, which is a group of Wisconsin and Minnesota folks who have an office in DC, and they provide small entrepreneur loans to individuals around the world. That was one of the first international jobs, then other organizations, and then the UN. And so we have traveled to meet him in Belgium and in Fiji and places where he's lived before. So it's been fun. And now he has left the UN and works for an organization, a consulting firm that manages State Department contracts around the world. I'll let him explain more about that, but we're very proud of him, and we're happy to introduce him to you. Till Brewitt.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't join you for lunch, as Tom mentioned. Just due to some scheduling issues, I may have to pick up and leave shortly. So I'm calling you right now from my home office in Washington, D.C. And I just wanted I was going to introduce myself, but Tom did most of the work. I'll just fill in a few of the blanks. I currently work with a company called Development Alternatives, Inc., or DAI. And I am the director of their finance, investment, and trade practice, which just means that projects that we do around the world that have a finance, investment, and trade component, that myself and my team provide the technical input, technical oversight, what we call quality assurance for our work that we're doing. And we also help a lot of the new projects get up and running related to finance, investment, and trade. And then sometimes, when I'm lucky, I get to work very closely with one of the projects, go into the country and actually work on some of the issues with a day-to-day basis with some of the team members. And as Tom mentioned, I did start my career as a commercial banker in New York City. That was relatively brief, for about 3.5 years. And then I shifted over to international development with a focus on access to finance. So I started off really working in what we call microfinance or community banking, helping to set up microfinance organizations or microfinance banks or community lending organizations in developing countries, working in Latin America, Africa, the former Soviet Union primarily. And then after that, I actually had my own consulting company for a while, and we were advising companies overseas that were doing the same thing that I had been doing with this international PVO or international organization for a while, on management consulting, helping them set up these companies or run them better. And then I kind of took a turn toward helping large development assistance agencies, and those include the U.S. government as an example, or what we call bilateral donor agencies. So these are agencies from a single country which provided development assistance to countries, but then also what we call the international or multilateral development institutions. So groups like the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank that also provide development support to countries. I started working more closely with them to help them structure projects to increase access to finance in countries. That led me to the United Nations, as Tom mentioned, where I worked for 11 years, starting 3 different projects related to incorporating digital tools into access to finance work. And then as for the last few years, I've been working with DAI. And I'll just briefly tell you about that. But in terms of the presentation, I think what Tom asked me to do is I've recently returned from Ukraine. Ukraine is a country where we do a lot of work. I've personally been involved in projects in Ukraine on and off since 2002. I had a long hiatus there for a while, but I'm back. And I spent some time there in September. So I have some pictures from that. And I'll focus more just on the experience of being in Ukraine during the war and kind of the experience of my team and my team members and colleagues. And then if you have more questions about what we were actually doing, I'll leave a little time for that. So as mentioned, the company Development Alternatives, Inc., or DAI, we're a for-profit company, but we're employee-owned. And we do a lot of work primarily for the bilateral development agencies, so government-related development agencies. The U.S. government is our largest client. We are a U.S. company, and within that, the U.S. Agency for International Development is our main client, and the State Department is a second client. Right now, we've worked all around the world, so we focus globally, and we'll talk a bit about what we do. But we have over 200 active projects, and for us, a project can be something very large. So we have projects that are well over $100 million for 5, 6, 7 years. And then sometimes we also have smaller projects, which may just be, say, $250,000, $300,000 for several months doing different things. So it can really, really vary from year to year. But here are just some statistics on the company where I currently work. And as mentioned, within this company, I run the practice area, which is a technical support area for things related to finance, investment, and trade. And then as far as the kind of support that we provide to projects in the field, well, first and foremost is we actually help start up projects that are to support developing countries in a number of different ways. And those projects can have a range of thematic areas. So as an example, we work in health, we work in environment and energy, we work in governance, so helping governments organize themselves. That can be related to democracy or even to fiscal management. The areas highlighted in red are the areas where I personally work in the organization. So I work a lot on economic growth issues, which includes access to finance and also business development. Also work on digital, as mentioned, with a focus on using digital channels to provide access to finance. And then we also have an investment arm called VI Capital. And I work fairly closely with them trying to create a bridge between our mainstream consulting work and then also the investment work that they do. And as mentioned, so I have a technical expertise as opposed to a geographic one. And Ukraine is just a country where we do have a lot of work as a company, and we have some very specific work in terms of financial sector reform, which is why I was recently in the country. A little bit more about Ukraine. So I know that Ukraine is in the news all the time. And, I think it can be confusing sometimes when you hear about all of the conflicting media or the conflicting ideas of, well, what is Ukraine? Does Ukraine really deserve Crimea? What are these Eastern territories? Are they really Russian? And I think I just put this slide up here not to go through it, but just to explain that it's complicated. It's very complicated, and what people think of Ukrainian history will very much depend on who you're talking to and their perspective on it, as opposed to necessarily what's actually happened. I think there are some important dates, though, for us to remember, dates with which we were personally, meaning the United States, was also involved, which has set up the current situation in Ukraine, but also explains why the U.S. has been supporting Ukraine, not only militarily, but actually over the past 30 years in other ways, in economic ways, in terms of improving governance, et cetera. So I would say a pivotal moment was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, one of the main concerns of the United States, given the relatively peaceful nature of the collapse, was nuclear weapons. And so the primary concern of the US government at the time was that the nuclear weapons for the Soviet Union were spread around the Soviet Union. And they wanted to get them concentrated with Russia, which at that time was viewed as friendly. So Ukraine had a lot of the nuclear weapons for the country, And so one of the big negotiation points with a newly independent Ukraine that had declared its independence was what to do with the nukes. So I'd say a pivotal moment in history here is right in the middle of 1994, which was basically the agreement to which the US was a party that said if Ukraine would give back the nuclear weapons, let them go to Russia to be destroyed, then the US would also provide, and Russia would provide security guarantees for Ukraine since they were giving up nuclear weapons. So I think that kind of explains, at least a very base level, why the US remains committed to Ukraine. We had agreed to that a long time ago. But a lot's happened in Ukraine since then. Ukraine did want to join NATO, but Russia was not having it. And so as a result, the US and NATO made a very, very light commitment about Ukraine joining NATO rather than a strong one. And there have been a series of different revolutions moving closer and closer to better democracy within Ukraine, and each one of those moving further away from Russia and closer to Europe. So I would say these other revolutions are also pivotal to understand what's going on. 2004 was a wake-up call, I think, to Russia because it was about kicking out a pro-Russian leader who actually delayed applying for EU membership. And then the Maidan Revolution was also about pushing out a pro-Russian leader because he refused to sign up once again for joining the EU. And I think this idea of EU, the European Union, as an aspiration for Ukraine has been there since its most recent founding, going back to 1991, and remains a big impetus and motivation for Ukrainians as a whole. And in terms of recent history, I'm sure a lot of you have been watching the news, you're quite familiar with it. The question as to why Russia invaded is probably a much more complicated one that we can talk about. But I do think that the new government was very much pro-Europe. While there's talk about them being so pro-Europe and so anti-corruption that it was threatening Russians' positions, having worked in Ukraine prior to the invasion, I can say that the Zelensky government was not always that hard on the Russian oligarchs, and they weren't always that anti-Russian. They were very much trying to walk a fine line between Russia and the West, sometimes to our frustration as we were trying to help them accede to the European Union through some of our projects. But at the same time, I think what Russia sensed was a moment of weakness and a moment of opportunity to do something that it's wanted to do for a while, which is reabsorb parts of Ukraine. And when I say parts, they're really interested in the parts that were primarily Russian speaking and are largely in the east of the country and were part of the industrial, what is now the Rust Belt of Ukraine. So in terms of our work, my company, although I've only been there for 3 years, they've been working there in Ukraine since 1994. We've had a lot of different projects working with a lot of different partners. U.S. Agency for International Development being the primary one, but also with the World Bank, with the European Union, and many others. Oddly enough, when I did have my own consulting firm, I was a subcontractor for my current company, and I worked in Ukraine with them from 2002 to 2004, flying in and out of the country, not living there regularly. But the project then was working to try to rebuild a financial sector that was basically decimated, destroyed, and bankrupt. And we were focused on building up credit unions within the context of Ukraine and small lending organizations that had disappeared as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the economy in Ukraine. So I worked there fairly intensely for about 2 years in the early 2000s and only just returned for the first time again in September with this new project that we were launching. As a company with the U.S. Agency for International Development, we have 4 big projects right now. 3, all of them were started with the exception of the one that I'm working on prior to the war. And I just wanted to give you a sense of what development assistance in Ukraine looks like and how it's changed as a result of the conflict. I think the first is the economic recovery activity. This activity we have was actually to try to strengthen the economies in the eastern part of Ukraine, including the then occupied areas by Russia, because you could move back and forth. It was very complicated. And those areas had really suffered ever since the 2014 invasion of Russia of eastern Ukraine and then the annexation of Crimea. And so it was trying to rejuvenate local economic activity, business support services, helping to link up with supply chains in the east, et cetera. A lot of training, and then also trying to attract investment and finance into small companies in that zone so that they could rebuild the economic life. So pretty much the entire territory in which that project once worked in has now been occupied or partially destroyed as a result of the war. So 80% of our area of operation right now, we can't work in. And actually what's happened is the project is no longer just focused on the eastern areas of Ukraine, but is now taking an entire Ukraine focus, given the influx of internally displaced people, and the need for them to develop a new economic livelihood someplace else. But for us as a company, it's also been very hard because virtually all of our staff had to be relocated because they were all located in these areas. So as noted here, 76 of 88 staff were displaced. And then we had 4 expatriates, not all Americans, but 2 Americans that were there who've left Ukraine. And the US government's not allowing Americans to come back to Ukraine permanently yet if we're working on government contracts. So the big shift for this project is going from focusing on what was then the conflict areas to really focusing on the entire country in terms of regenerating economic activity, but also with a greater focus on internally displaced persons restarting their livelihoods. The cybersecurity for critical infrastructure in Ukraine project was always complicated. As you probably are aware, if you've ever had phishing incidents, Ukraine is notorious and also well known for having good technology chops, including when it comes to cyber and cybersecurity. But they also have a lot of risks. Ukraine has been fighting a cybersecurity war with Russia since 2014. And so the purpose of this project was to help them build up the security around critical infrastructure. So it wasn't just about the internet itself, but also the internet connections around critical infrastructure, things like energy and the grids, water, etc. And, actually the work, while the project is relatively young, the work that they're doing is incredibly important right now. I think one of the reasons we're not hearing about a lot of security breaches in Ukraine at the moment is because of the work of this project, as well as one of the ministries in Ukraine, the Ministry for Digital Transformation, which has done a fairly good job at trying to protect their critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. And then we have another project which has been very much directly impacted by the war. It's a governance and local accountability project, Hoverla. Hoverla is the tallest peak within Ukraine, so it was an aspirational name. But this project is really to try to focus on decentralization. Under the Soviet Union, and historically Ukraine was very centralized, with all of the governance being from the top down. This is about building up local government, so both the province, or what we would call the state level, as well as the local level, so that they can start to manage more of the budget, implement services, come up with the citizenry to design projects, and take control more of the own development of the regions. So this has been a challenge under the war because, again, in wartime, things tend to get very, very centralized. And so a big part of this right now is helping the local governments dealing with whatever the catastrophe is in their region. And that could be damage due to missile strikes. It could be that they've got a high influx of refugees. It could just be that there's massive unemployment. So they're working with the different local governments in which the regions in which they work to help them figure out how do they deal with stabilization and then reconstruction, but also maintaining pressure on the federal government that some of the funds get decentralized so that the local units can start to figure out the best way to spend it. And then the new project. So it's been interesting trying to launch a new project in the middle of a war. We can only go into the country for very limited periods of time. But this is a follow-on project to something that I had been working on previously called financial sector transformation. It's a second iteration of it called financial sector reform. We designed this project prior to the war and prior to really thinking that there would be an invasion in Ukraine. And the idea of it was to build a more transparent and robust and inclusive financial sector, something we've been working on for a while. And what we mean by that is that Ukraine is very much a bank concentrated market. And even within that, primarily state-owned banks or banks that are very closely held by oligarchs. We had been working to try to do a couple things. One is to build out the legal and regulatory environment to allow for a greater variety of financial institutions. So think leasing companies and digital finance companies and all sorts of things that we have access to here in the United States. And then at the same time, trying to build out the capital markets, which are virtually non-existent in Ukraine. And then last but not least is the financial infrastructure that connects all of these organizations, is helping them design it and procure the services and the software and hardware necessary for financial infrastructure, things that move money like payments and settlement services. So why did I go to Ukraine? Because we're launching a new project. And it's very hard to launch a new project if you can't go and meet some of your team. And that we have team members from our previous project who are coming back to us. And so we were already able to start this up fairly quickly with a core group of 10 persons. And the idea was for us to all meet together. And as you may be aware, men in Ukraine that are under the age of 55 aren't allowed to leave the country. While we don't have that many men in our core group of starting this new project, we wanted to make sure that we could have everyone present. So we decided to have our work planning session in Ukraine. What that meant is that 3 of us from the United States flew over. We stopped in Vienna, flew to Krakow in Poland, and then you can drive across the border through multiple border crossings into Ukraine. There are no commercial flights into Ukraine right now because of the war and the security situation. So the only way to get into the country is to drive across the border. And going in from Poland is the most usual route. There are several border crossings, larger and smaller, going in from Poland, and we chose this one because we were able to go across a smaller crossing that had shorter lines, because the lines can be anywhere from a few hours to a day, depending. It's about a 4-hour drive, and you organize a car service, and you pile into a relatively nice car, and then you've got nice European Union paid for roads going from Krakow to the border. And then you get to the border and it's not so difficult getting out of Poland. You know, they ask you a few questions, they check your car and you go through clearing. And then when you get into Ukraine, I guess they're not so concerned, to be honest, on the Ukrainian side about letting you in either. They're a little bit curious about why you're coming in. So we had explained to them what we were doing. We had letters and stuff, which they really didn't check. They also checked the car to make sure we weren't bringing any munitions, but then they let us go. So we were quite lucky. We were able to cross the border in just about 2.5 hours total, both the Polish side and then the Ukrainian side. And then from the border, it was about an hour and 15-minute drive to the city of Lviv, which is one of Ukraine's major cities. I think it's its 4th or 5th largest. And that's where we held our work planning sessions. And I've just included some of the pictures of the border. You can see the line of trucks. This is on the Ukrainian side because the checks of trucks coming out of Ukraine into Poland are very, very tight because there's concern of weapons smuggling. And also, as mentioned, men under 55 without special permission aren't supposed to leave the country. So both the Ukrainian side and the Polish side are really scrutinizing lorries as they leave the country. This line of trucks went for about 5 kilometers, so like 2.5 miles. And I heard that it could take up to 6 days for some of these trucks to get back across the border to Poland. You know, once you get into Lviv, Lviv is about as far from the front lines in Ukraine as you can get. And also, historically, Lviv was part of the Habsburg Empire and then part of Poland. And so Lviv doesn't really have what you'd call a Russian feel to it. It has very much kind of an Austrian feel to it, or a Prague feel to it. It's a charming city and largely built out during Habsburg time. When you do get outside of the city center in Lviv, you start to see more of the Russian, the architecture added during the Soviet era. But in the center of town, it really is lovely. And I will say that based on my previous trip here some 20 years ago, that they have done a lot to restore it, and Lviv has become quite a popular tourist destination for the region, but also for Europe. That being said, so, you know, there is a certain normalcy to Lviv, and also a lot of Ukrainians who are in other parts of Ukraine that do have more regular missile attacks or are closer to the front lines come to Lviv because it's one of the few places that they can travel in country to get some sense of normalcy. And, you know, we were surprised at how many younger men were on the streets. And then what we heard is that this is just one of the places where they can go blow off steam, either between military service or because they're not yet in the service, and it's someplace that they can go. But at the same time, throughout the city, there are the reminders of the war. So there's a lot of different, you know, propaganda, posters, paraphernalia, souvenirs, etc., about the war. One of the things that they've done in all of the major cities in Ukraine, particularly those that aren't that have been relatively untouched by the war so far, is they've brought in some of the hulking masses of planes and tanks and other military equipment from Russia that they've destroyed and placed them in the centers of the cities to remind people, one, that there's a war going on, but also just to kind of, I guess, build up national pride for what Ukraine's been able to accomplish in terms of taking down the Russian military. And so what you see here is on the town square. This is on a lovely Sunday afternoon, but people are walking by looking at the Russian tanks. There's a whole description of what this military vehicle is for, how large it is, and how it was destroyed in which battle and where. So they're very much doing, I think, a very interesting and good job at keeping the citizen morale up, but also reminding people that they are in fact in the middle of war, because it doesn't always feel like it. And of course, there's a lot of anti-Russian propaganda, anti-Putin propaganda around the town. And because this town is a tourist town, there's actually quite a big industry, souvenirs, that you can buy related to the war, T-shirts and things like that. And they're doing a booming business right now, just to give you some idea. At the same time, the war is never very far. So when you go into the country, we're required to sign up for this app. It's an app about missile strikes, an app that everyone in Ukraine uses. It was developed by an entrepreneur, but then adopted by the government. So whenever there is a missile launch that be coming in the direction of where you're going, or that they know a missile is headed in your direction, your phone will go off and you see this lovely little icon that tells you a bomb is about to fall on your head. So we all have these on our phones. And when it goes off, basically the drill is you get up, you go down to the bomb shelter, and then you wait for the app to clear, which is the all clear sign with the blue. Unfortunately, I don't really speak Ukrainian. I can read a little bit Cyrillic, but fortunately, I had my colleagues to translate for me. During the time that I was there, we had 3 different alerts that sent us down to the basement. 2 were in the morning, 1 was in the evening, and I jokingly said, the first one I took my phone. Second one, not knowing how long it was going to be, I took a computer. And then the third one, not knowing how long it was going to be, and it was the evening, I took a bottle of wine down to the cellar. So, after a while, you do sort of get used to it. But of course, the most recent events in the past week have shown that the missile defense system can be overwhelmed, and it has been overwhelmed. And Lviv was hit twice in the last week, taking out energy facilities. So my colleagues have been on rolling brownouts in Lviv. And there you see some colleagues there that I was working with to develop the work plan for our new project. And I realized we have a time limit here. I just wanted to stop and see if someone could scream out how much time we have left.
About 5.
5 minutes. Okay. So what I'd like to do is maybe just tell you a couple stories about what people have gone through of my colleagues around the room. As I mentioned, we had a previous project. Everyone that you see at this table had worked on our previous project and is fortunately coming back. And there was a hiatus between the projects because of the war. But I think one of the best things that I could do and so while her particular street, an apartment was not occupied, but did hold it for a period of time, she fled and she went into the center of Ukraine and spent about 3 months living with her parents. The Russians, as you know, left Kyiv fairly quickly and got pushed back to the Belarusian border early in the war. She's since returned to Kyiv. She spent the in-between time between our 2 projects actually working with another not the financial sector reform project, but with another project that we have, which is related to the local governance, so Haverla project. Things have gotten in some ways very when you're in Lviv, you feel like you're kind of on the outside of the being in. But I think she has had a fairly traumatic time of it all done, not nearly as bad as some others. So as an example, Tanya, the woman on the left, is an IT expert. She and part of her family is stuck in the Russian occupied area. And so they've been cut off with contact, although there's elements of her family that are very much pro-Russian. She's got some family members who are based in Russia and actually think that Putin is right and think that this invasion is correct. And so it's very difficult for them to communicate. Also, both of her daughters went overseas when she doing procurement of
I'll just go on my phone. It'd be more regular.
destroyed. So during the initial invasion. And at the back, a colleague of mine, Vladimir. So Vladimir, he's actually of draft age. He's currently working. He shifted after our projects to work for a commercial bank based out of Lviv, so he was already there. And what he does is he tries to negotiate international funding into the bank to try to keep it afloat, to help it continue lending during the war. He's interested in coming back to the project, but because of the work that he's doing, he has a deferral from the military. So his big preoccupation is he doesn't want to end up in the front lines. He feels like he can do more in his current position. And so he probably won't be rejoining us because he's got a military deferral to try to keep attracting capital into the country. And all of his entire family, he shipped overseas to Switzerland. So he hasn't been able to leave the country, and his family hasn't been back since March. So it gives you some idea of what they've all gone through. So with that, I think maybe I can stop. I had a few slides on what we're actually going to be doing, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those on. Or if you want to hear a little bit more about what we're going to be doing, I'm happy to talk about it.
Thanks, Till. I think we do have some questions. So, Ed?
I'll do my best to answer.
Could he talk a little bit about the upcoming winter and loss of heating products, loss of power, how they might cope?
The question is, with winter coming on, how are loss of power, heating products going to affect the nation?
Yeah, I mean, most of what I will tell you is probably from accessible news sources that you could also see, but I can give you maybe a little insight from my colleagues. So a couple things. One, I would say when I was leaving Ukraine in September, there was a high sense of optimism because of recent gains in the field of battle. I left Ukraine the day before the big offensive in the north, where Ukraine perhaps shed a lot of territory, but they were already starting to make gains and people feeling fairly confident going into the winter. I would say that with the missile strikes of last week, and especially the fact that they've been focused on infrastructure that's going, especially electricity, there's been a real darkening of mood among my colleagues. There is a real concern about, before it was, about having some heating shortages. Now it's in some areas, it's worrying that they may not have heat at all because they realize that their missile defense system can be overwhelmed unless they can beef it up. At the same time, they also know that Russia is running out of ways to attack it. So I think there is a lot of concern, and a lot of people have focused on finding things like generators, but generators require fuel. Fuels also could be difficult to come by in the winter. So there is concern.
Another one?
Yeah, over the years, there's been talk about corruption in Ukraine. You don't hear much about that anymore. Was that corruption associated with this current government, or could you expand a little bit about what that was all about?
So the question relates to, historically, there's been concern about corruption in the government, and was some of that about this government and how it's impacting?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been the big battle with Ukraine throughout most of its existence, is concentration of power and corruption. And to some degree, that corruption has also been linked to the pro-Russia versus pro-Europe wings in politics, but within the country itself. You had sort of pro-Western oligarchs, you had pro-Russian oligarchs, but the corruption in both was pretty endemic. This government, the Zelensky government, really, as you know, he's an actor. He came in on a platform of cleaning up government. And initially, I think he did try to make really strong strides. But I think in order to get anything done, and I'm speaking from our experience as a project, we found that the government was backsliding a little bit in terms of corruption, turning a blind eye to what some of the more friendly oligarchs were doing. And also there had, prior to the invasion, or I should say leading up to the invasion, maybe for a period of 6 to 12 months, it seemed like the government was doing more and more to try to appease Russia, to appease Putin. And so we even saw some placement of some questionable people in different roles in the government because of, and that tended to have a more pro-Russian stance. That being said, I think that was trying to find the right balance, because I think that the President Zelensky, knew that the country was at risk and that he had to walk a fine line between Russia and the EU, although he personally has always been fairly pro-European. And then I think part of it too is a fairly novice government getting outmaneuvered. I think we can all agree that the president has risen to the occasion and is a leader now for our times, but that, sometimes people come out of very different situations before they become great heroes.
Okay. One more question or two?
Okay.
Yep.
I'm a little confused, or maybe you can explain a little more about his relationship to the State Department, USAID. So, like, if the USAID says we're going in to provide some services, his organization is really doing it for them. Is he like a subcontractor?
So, in essence, the question is whether your organization acts as a subcontractor to USAID.
Yes, we are. We are a subcontractor to USAID, although we also have some projects, not in Ukraine right now, but other projects that are subcontracted directly with the State Department. There are pockets of development assistance money or reconstruction money across the U.S. government. USAID is not the sole source, although they're the major source.
Ken?
Just would you care to speculate as to how this is going to end and how long it will take?
The question is, do you care to speculate on how this will end and how long that might take?
Well, that didn't end well for Elon Musk, did it? Or maybe for Ukraine. I think no one expected it to still be going on, and that's mostly because we've all been impressed with what the Ukrainian people have been able to do. I think this is going to be a long conflict, and it's going to go on for a while, and it's mainly going to play out on Ukrainian soil. And I think in some ways, this is an extension of what started back in 2014 with the first Russian invasion. And it's very hard to see how, short of Putin losing power and a more reformist or pro-Western government coming in, that this will end in the near future.
One last question, Jim.
Along with the question, the previous question, how do you see Belarus and its role?
Question is how Belarus, what role they play in this.
I mean, I can only speak from my own observations and reading, but I think the untold story of this is that Belarus has basically ceased to exist as an independent country when Russia started moving troops in for the invasion of Ukraine. You don't hear much from the president anymore, and I think that's deliberate. So I think that, I don't think that Belarus can be viewed as anything but a party to this war, and I'm not even sure that at this moment in time, given the large military presence, Russian military presence in Belarus, that it can be considered an independent country.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for letting me be here virtually.
Good luck in your travels. Okay. Okay, now on to, is this working?
More or less.
We'll try again. Just needed to turn it off and on. Okay, now we'll go on to the business portion of the meeting. Actually, Abe, where is Abe? Moment of reflection.
Oh, that's now? Okay.
Well, according to the script I was given, it's now.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, in view of this topic today, I got to messing around on the internet, and I found something that interested me. First, I wondered about, just impressed at the efforts of the Ukrainian people to ensure that they have a say in what kind of government they have, and the freedoms that they're actually looking for. And so I brought up freedom, and I got an interesting quote about privacy. I got to thinking, in our Bill of Rights, I couldn't think of any place where privacy is mentioned. We got freedom of religion, we got freedom of speech, assembly, and all of those things, but I never saw the issue of privacy mentioned. Then you get to thinking about all of the development of the internet, the development of all of the systems for surfing the internet, searching for information, etc. The social media programs that are operated by large companies, and the extent to which those companies and systems can collect data and information about everything we do. And so a little quote that was given by a fellow by the name of Bruce Shiner. He's a cryptographer. He's also a computer security professional, and he works in the area of privacy. He's a lecturer in the Harvard Kennedy School on Public Policy. And there's a little statement that they called the eternal value of privacy. For if we are observed in all matters, we are constantly under the threat of correction, judgment, criticism, or even plagiarism of our own uniqueness. We become children fettered under watchful eyes, constantly fearful that, either now or in the uncertain future, patterns we leave behind will be brought back to implicate us by whatever authority has now become focused upon our once private and innocent acts. We lose individuality because everything we do is observable and recordable. That kind of struck me as an interesting comment from someone who deals in the cryptography and security areas.
Thanks, Abe. I'm actually going to ask Bill Schultz to come up and give us a little summary of the season for the Miracle League and maybe where it might be heading.
Well, thank you. I can sum up the whole season with the word incredible. We had 200 kids this year compared to 96 the year before. And near the end of the summer, parents asked us, well, can't we play in the fall? Is there any way we could play in the fall? Kids were asking. So at the last minute, we actually formed a fall league, which started in mid-September and went till last Wednesday. And we had 60 kids that signed up right away. I think next year when we have earlier notice, we'll probably double that amount. But one thing, last Wednesday night, if you recall, it was very rainy and very windy. And we were out there playing a game, and the parents were all ready to go home, but the kids were not. They were out there playing, didn't care how wet they were. They wanted to bat, they wanted to run, they wanted to score. Every night is just a fulfilling experience for me. And, you know, next year we hope hopefully we're looking at 250 to 300 kids, we think. We've developed a network of with special ed teachers, counselors, and case managers who now know about us and are getting feedback from the parents that they are helping in a very positive way. Some of the kids came up to a lot of us and said, well, when's our next game? I said, well, I'm sorry, the season is over. And many parents, sometime I'd like to come back and show you, talk to you about all the testimonials I've gotten. But one boy told his parents that, okay, the season is over. What I want you to do is to put my uniform in a framed picture with the medal that we give the kids. So in his bedroom, he's got his uniform and his medal right beside his bed. Many parents have said that their kids go to school and wear their uniform for the entire year. So it's just incredible. You know, you can't measure the return and investment that the club has put into this Miracle League in dollars. But I can tell you that the return you can see in the terms of joy and happiness and making these kids feel incredible. But it also has impacted the parents in a big way. Not to mention, as well as to mention, over 300 volunteers we had this year. Mostly, a lot of them are high school and middle school kids that really were impacted immensely by watching these kids that they're volunteering with, and just I think coming away saying, "Wow, I didn't realize that these kids could do this," and I think it flows over to their own life of saying, you know, maybe I can do more than I think I can. So, again, I can't thank this club enough for the investment you put into this league, and we're excited about the future. So. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil. I didn't mean to ambush you, but and we've been getting periodic updates throughout the season, but it's really nice to hear that, and maybe it would be a good idea to have a more formal presentation where. So, okay, a couple other things that have come up. One is there's something coming up with the ALS Association. They're doing a walk, 2022 Madison Walk to Defeat ALS. It's this Saturday, and they're looking for volunteers to help out. And this message came in earlier last week. Unfortunately, I was out of town all week. And so it depends upon the job. The walk is between 7 and 1 at Vilas Park. I will forward this email in case anyone is interested. There's a place to sign up and a name to contact. The next one is from the Adopt a School Partners and Foundation Friends. And they're inviting people to participate in a Unity in the Community rally that the Madison Public School Foundation, MTI, and MMSD are hosting on Monday, October 24th. And it starts at 5 a.m. at the Madison Metropolitan School District Central Office. What? 5 p.m. Okay. Over on Dayton Street by the Cole Center, and they're going to march to the Capitol and participate in a short program encouraging unity and reminding community members to vote. So. Another thing is we got an email from Marty Wallace's, Scott's widow, And she's been going through things and found many things associated with his long tenure and participation in the club. One of the things was she found 2 Santa red hats and wristlet jingle bells from his long participation in the bell ringing team. She also said that I don't know if it's been done, but there's memorial contributions to contribute to the club. I think the main impetus was, and I was not there, but the big K that was done for the anniversary, and she's looking for a home for it. So that's something that the board can discuss, but I thought it was really nice that to hear from her and to contact. Ken, I'm just checking up on the Braxton Street.
We had 9 people step up and said that they would be willing to help. And some of them said they're not going to be able to help in some of the months in the winter because they're snowbirds. But I emailed begged the lady from our church that's involved with it and said that we've got 9 and please give me a date in December or January we can go ahead and participate and provide the meal.
Okay, great. So it is date to be determined?
Yes.
Okay, so more on that. And then I just want to give you a warning. I think I alluded to this last week. All of a sudden my travel schedule is picking up. So I'm here today, then I am out of town through next Tuesday. I'm thinking maybe I might be able to participate, but I'm going to be at the board meeting finding a volunteer to MC next week's meeting. Well, what am I doing up here? But, being the master of ceremony. Well, that too. Okay. Are there any other announcements from?
I'll just do from here. I just wanted to mention that we got 2 thank you letters, one from the Cambodian School Project and the other from Kenyan Scholars, both of this week fund through the International Committee. They're saying essentially thank you for the contribution and that it's been put to good purpose.
Great, that's good to hear, because I think that was a question as we were putting some of the budgets together, just making sure the money we're giving out, 1 is getting there and 2 is needed. Okay.
I've got a comment that goes along with the Kenyan scholarships. I assumed that everybody was getting the emails that I was getting, but maybe not. I got an email from, I can't remember his name, Saban? Yeah.
That's on
But I got an email from that person saying that his father, who started the program, is retiring. And they're going to have some kind of celebration, and everybody that wants club is invited. Bring money.
Okay.
I don't know what to do with that.
You're going to give more details?
Well, there are more details. I just don't remember them, but I can forward it to you.
Okay, that would be great. Maybe I'll get it out to the club or put it in the next meeting notice. Anything else from the audience, from other members? If not, I think as all of you know, we have a once monthly board meeting, and this is the day for the board meeting. So the board is going to stay afterwards to have the board meeting, and anyone else that wants to participate is welcome to participate. I guarantee we're going to get done in an hour because several of us have commitments backing up on it. So other than that, if there are, let me check to make sure, if there are nothing else, I'm at the bottom of the schedule and we can adjourn.